Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this training session brought to you by the Society of American Archivists, Archivists of Religious Collections Section. My name is Vinny Barraza, and we acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional lands of many indigenous nations. We know that indigenous peoples have suffered from historical and ongoing injustices and understand as an archival organization that we must work towards sharing historical truths and renew respectful relationships with indigenous communities. We respect the long-standing relationships that indigenous nations have to this land as the original caretakers. We are grateful for their stewardship and protection of the water and earth. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Today's topic is preserving audio tapes and videotapes. Before I introduce our presenter, let's review the disclaimer. The content in these presentations is for information only and is not legal advice. Our views do not represent the organizations where we work. We do not make any endorsements or guarantees. We are not liable for any loss or damage caused by your use of the content we provide, and it is your responsibility to critically evaluate the content provided in the presentation or any accompanying materials. Also, please remember the points shown on this slide. You will not be able to use your microphone or video during this session. You can click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of your screen, and under Live Transcript, click Enable Auto Transcription to get closed captioning. There will be a question period after the presentation concludes. You should use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. We will not answer any questions you post in the chat or unmute attendees due to time constraints. Please be respectful in your interactions. We expect you to follow the SAA Code of Conduct, and the session is being recorded, so please fill out a short survey after the session ends. We encourage you to join the Society of American Archivists if you are not a member, and we thank the congregations of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Canada for hosting this webinar. And now I would like to introduce our presenter. Andrew Thomas has worked in the field of audiovisual conservation and preservation for over 20 years. He enjoys all things audiovisual related, along with building and playing musical instruments. The idea of helping to preserve audio, video, and film so they can be available for people to enjoy in the present and in the future is the main reason he enjoys working in this field. Currently, he provides audiovisual conservation and preservation for the Church History Library located in Salt Lake City, Utah. He works with everything from phonograph wax cylinders to digital-born AV files and all types of other formats in between. He resides in Kaysville, Utah with his wife, Liza, and their 3 children, Gibson, Abigail, and Benjamin. In his spare time, which he has little of, he can be found playing guitars, recording music, and trying to learn any cool instruments he can get his hands on. But usually he and his wife are busy trying to keep up with their young kids. So I will hand it over to Mr. Thomas.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna hurry and share my screen here. All right. Well, it's good to be here with you. I hope what I have to share will help anybody who might be dealing with magnetic tape-based formats. As was said, my name is Andrew Thomas, and I first wanted to share, let's see if I can just move this out of the way. As was said, my name is Andrew Thomas. I first wanted to share a photo of the Church History Library building I work in. As was said, it's located in Salt Lake City, Utah. Along with that, this is myself and the team I get to work with in preserving audiovisual content in our collection. They're a great bunch to work with, and they have so much knowledge, and I just wanted to acknowledge them and the great work that they do. We were actually staring into the sun when that photo was taken, so that's why we're all kind of have sunglasses and squinting. Also, I'll be saying AV a lot in this presentation. This is just short for audiovisual. In past presentations, I've had some people not familiar with audiovisual jargon confused by this, so I just wanted to include this up front. There is a lot that can be said about tape-based formats, and I kind of feel like this bird in the photo. I'm really just going to be skimming the surface I chose what I thought might be helpful, but I couldn't include many things. But at the end of my presentation, I will share a few great resources that I've used and have found very helpful. I first wanted to start with a question. How are AV items different from other library items such as books, manuscripts, and photographs? AV items are machine-based, meaning they need external equipment to be played and digitized. With a book or document, most often if somebody brings that to you, you can look at it and you can see the information without using any external devices. But with AV items, most often you need to view the content using machines and other equipment. One other thing, there are a lot of different AV formats and each have their own unique challenges. Because of this, I'm very big on documentation, standards, and processes, which helps to give consistent results. My team and I work with 48 different physical AV formats, along with 58 different AV digital file formats. So it can get kind of confusing, and having standards and documentation is really important and can help take some of that confusion out. First, some important things to consider with AV preservation. Being able to identify what you have in your collection is where I think is the best place to start. The Museum of Obsolete Media is honestly my favorite website when it comes to helping with format identification. Along with identifying AV formats, it also identifies things like photographic formats, all kinds of data carriers, and even things like video game formats. You can see in the slide, there's even a PS5 PlayStation Spider-Man game. So it's kind of cool that it encompasses all kinds of different formats. It's my go-to site whenever we get something in the library that I've never seen before, and most often I've found it there. This leads to the scope and condition of AV items in your collection. Knowing how many items of each format that are in a collection and their condition can especially be important when trying to figure out if you want to digitize in-house or outsource the work to a vendor, which leads to my next slide. For many libraries and archives, it makes sense to outsource the AV digitization work. For an archive or a library that only has a set number of AV formats and they don't plan on receiving more, in most cases, I would say that outsourcing might be the best option rather than investing in all the equipment and knowledge to digitize in-house. Outsourcing is also a great option for AV formats where playback machines are really hard to find, and that's getting more and more common. The good news is there are a lot of great vendors out there. Just like any vendor being used, you want to check them out, make sure that they're reputable. On the flip side, digitizing in-house is also a great option, especially if you want to learn the skills and have the necessary equipment or are willing to purchase it. Then it might make sense to migrate in-house. You can also do a hybrid approach, which I think a lot of archives and libraries do, where you outsource formats that you can't play or don't want to deal with maybe. For example, this is a format I'm going to discuss right here that I didn't want to deal with. With our 2-inch videotapes in our collection, we decided to outsource the digitization work. It's a really difficult format to deal with, and we don't have a 2-inch machine like you see in the photo. So I was actually really glad to outsource it. Also, if your collection has issues with things like mold or other damage, unless it can be dealt with in-house, that would also be a good reason to outsource. At times it can be cost efficient and makes more sense to digitize in-house, but it really depends on the collection, excuse me, and the staff, if the staff has the knowledge of how to work with the AV items. One thing I will say too, dealing with playback machines can be really difficult. This includes fixing, cleaning, maintaining them, and it can be easy to forget that side of it and the costs associated with that upkeep. Choosing the right codecs and formats for long-term preservation is also one of the most important steps in AV preservation. Before digitizing your AV content, you should first know how and where the content will be stored. Questions like, will you use hard drives or an LTO tape system, or maybe a cloud storage solution? Those kinds of questions should honestly be answered before jumping in to digitization. If you get all these files, but then you don't really have a good way of storing them, that could be a problem. Another important aspect is having multiple copies of the content stored in different locations, which will give you a protection from data loss. Also, things like folder structures, naming conventions, and file organization is extremely important. And with all digital preservation, the key is migration. This includes refreshing storage devices and keeping an eye on digital files that are moving towards obsolescence. And that's not easy. Oftentimes I'll say, get out your magic 8-ball, because sometimes it's a guess. There's some formats, some digital formats that I thought would be long gone, but they're still being used. So I thought it might be interesting just to show what our folder structure and naming convention looks like. Something that we do that's a bit unique is we include an abbreviated name of the original physical format in our file names. So if you see up here, the preservation master files, right below there's the parent folder that says AV127, so that's our call number. And then 14AT, that actually represents 1/4-inch audio tape. And then if you look down past the preservation master, it's also in that name. And so this is kind of a unique thing, I think, to what we do. We also obviously keep this information in our catalog records, but it's come in really handy to be able to see at a glance what a file format came from. This is especially helpful when doing comparisons of content. So like if we had a program that was the same program recorded on multiple formats, if you're doing a comparison, it's really nice to be able to say, okay, this came from a cassette tape, this came from a 1/4-inch tape, and kind of know right off the bat what format it came from. These are our archival standards that have worked well for our library. That's not to say these are the end all of standards, but they've worked well for us. And I think the key is finding stable formats, codecs, and wrappers, and being ready to migrate to a different one if the codec or wrapper becomes obsolete. For example, with our motion picture film, we used to take our DPX images that, it's frame by frame on the film, and we just tar them. And I didn't ever really like that because it makes the images unusable. You have to unzip them, and that can take a long time. And so we moved to a different approach using FFV1 MKV using raw cooked, which encodes it to a format that you can play and use. So getting into the main part of my presentation, I first wanted to show a simplified anatomy of magnetic tape. There are different variations, but basically you have the top layer, which is the binder. This is where the audio signal is recorded, specifically on the iron oxide particles. The binder, which is represented in light brown on the top layer, is really the glue that holds the iron oxide and the tape lubricant on the base layer. The base layer, which is represented in blue, that can be many different material types, but the most common in archives and libraries that I've found are acetate and polyester. Some tapes use back coating and some don't, and that's the black layer that's on the bottom. This coating was used to prevent an issue called print through, which is where the signal could bleed onto the opposite side of the tape, causing unwanted sounds when played back. I just included it there because some tapes have it, some don't. So it's something to be aware of. Audio tapes can come in different sizes. The most common sizes that we have in our collection are 1/4-inch and 1/8 inch, which is the size of tape found in audio cassette. The other 3 sizes were often used in professional or broadcast recordings. And a lot of times what I'll find is, archives have a mix of all of them. We do too. We have 2-inch, 1-inch, all of them, but by far we have the most 1/4-inch and 1/8 in our collection. So the audio recorded on a tape is contained on tracks. These are 3-track layouts. You've got full track, 2-channel, 2-track, and 2-channel 4-track. They are the most common that I work with, but there are many different track layouts that can be used on audio tape. I actually was going to include them all, and the slide just was a nightmare. You couldn't even tell what I was trying to say. So I pared it down to just the 3 main track layouts. Sometimes if the audio reel has a box or labeling information, and if you're lucky, the track layout might be included on there. However, in many cases, you won't have that information, and so you'll have to, put on your Sherlock Holmes cap and figure it out. Finding a tape's track layout can at times be challenging. Also, just in this slide, what you see here, there's kind of like the cartoon version up top. And then I took a picture of one of our playback reel-to-reel machines, just so you could see sort of what they look like in real life. So you've got the full track and then 4-track, 2-track. So how do you figure out a track layout? Luckily, there are a couple ways to help with it. There are MagTrack viewers that can let you see the tracks. These work great for tapes that have a strong recorded signal. What I mean by that, so if you put a tape on a machine and you play it, and you don't have to turn it up very loud, then the signal will show up in the MagTrack viewer pretty well. For tapes where content was recorded very low and you have to crank it to hear it, they don't always work well. Another way is to use playback machines and just switch the settings. This is what I'd call the trial and error method. Also, if you have like a 4-track machine that's what they call discrete track layout that plays all the tracks at the same time, sometimes you can figure it out pretty easily using that. But without getting too far into the weeds, in short, you want to make sure to digitize tapes using the correct track layout. Otherwise, you will not capture the full range of audio. And there's even a chance that you could miss tracks altogether. Audio reels also come in different sizes. I don't have all the reel sizes here in this photo, but the sizes can range from 14 inches to 2 inches. The 2-inch are pretty much garbage. They're horrible. Often consumer reel-to-reel playback machines can't accommodate the 10.5-inch or larger reels. So that's something to be aware of if you're purchasing a reel-to-reel machine and you have 10.5-inch reels in your collection. You'll also notice that the larger 10.5-inch reel has a larger center hole. With those types of reels, you must use something called an NAB hub adapter, which allows you to correctly place the tape on the machine so it can play back. I wanted to include this photo just to show how much tape can be on a single reel. I was getting rid of, this is a 1/2-inch tape, and I was getting rid of it, and I thought, I'm gonna see how much tape is on one of these, so I unreeled it. And yeah, so that's my feet there. And so yeah, a 10.5-inch reel like the one in the picture can hold anywhere from 2,500 to 3,600 feet of tape. So there's a lot of tape on a single reel. Audio reels can have different playback speeds. IPS is an acronym for inches per second, which is how the speed of tape is measured. With some audio reels, you can have multiple tape speeds. And what I mean by that is I've transferred a lot of tapes that have been like oral histories and things where people have been recording, and I think the stories and things go longer than the tape, and they realize that, and so they'll just switch the machine mid-sentence sometimes. And so, you know, you'll be playing a tape and it's fine, and then all of a sudden it'll slow way down. And so something to think about that can happen. Just one thing to realize too is the faster the speed of the tape, the higher the sound quality. This is why music was often recorded at 15 IPS or 30 IPS. Some people say IPS. I like IPS. Many libraries and archives will have acetate tapes in their collection. Acetate tape is much less stable than polyester. They often have issues with things like brittleness and deformation, which makes the tape not sit correctly on the playback head. So again, you can, miss some of the frequencies that should be there if the tape is deformed. Also, just playing them back, sometimes the tapes can kind of pull off of the tape path and cause some issues. So something to be aware of. Acetate tape can also have off-gassing issues, which is where the chemicals in the tape breaks down, and it can cause a lot of the issues I just explained. You can actually see in the photo on the slide that the off-gassing in this case was so bad that it created almost a photographic image of the reel in the box, which is kind of an interesting, usually that's a bad sign. So it's cool, but it's not a good sign. When this happens, the tape becomes really brittle and deformed. Tapes in this condition, if you have these kind of tapes, they should be digitized as soon as possible, as they're at high risk and they'll keep getting worse. Understanding how to identify acetate tape from polyester is also important. When you hold an acetate tape up to the light, any kind of light source, you'll be able to see through it. As you can see in the picture, you can see my fingers in there. When polyester is held up to the light, it's opaque. Acetate and polyester tapes have different problems and different fixes and solutions. So being able to identify them is important. There are also tape bases, other tape bases such as like PVC and even paper. We have a few of those in our collection, but they are less common in my experience. That's why I'm kind of just sticking with polyester and acetate as they're the most prolific in collections. Another big difference between acetate-based tapes and polyester is how they break. Acetate breaks clean while polyester stretches. So when an acetate tape breaks, it's a much easier fix. As you can see there in the picture, the two pieces, they line up and you can put them back together and use some splicing tape to fix them without losing information. When polyester breaks, most often you have to cut out the whole stretched portion. I will say though, polyester tape, I haven't had it break very often. Usually when it breaks, it seems like it's something to do with the machine and it's torquing it too hard and it's pulling the tape. So I've had acetate tape break a lot more than polyester, so that's a good thing. Many libraries and archives will have audio cassette tapes as they're a really prolific format. The first thing I'll say about cassettes is I always remove the write protect tabs. This will help to ensure that the content won't be recorded over by accident. So that's what I'm doing in the pictures, just snapping those out. Anyone who's dealt with cassette tapes knows exactly what is being shown there. I worked on a collection of cassette tapes, and after removing the write protect tabs, I put a tape in to play, and there was nothing but background noise for about a minute. And I thought, oh man, I wonder if nothing's on there. Then suddenly I heard a voice on the recording say, oh no, and then the content came on. So obviously somebody had put a tape in to play it and accidentally hit record and recorded over that and also recorded their voice. So yeah, it's one of those cautionary things. In fact, sometimes when donors have come in to give us their cassettes, if they're there, I'll actually break them out right there in front of them just to show them and explain, like, I want you to know that, you know, we don't want to erase over this content. Audio cassettes can come in different tape formulas. The different tape types have to do with the type of oxide particles used in the tape formula. They can be identified by the tops of the cassettes. Some cassette playback machines will automatically change their settings to match the cassette's format. But some of the older machines I've found, you have to do it manually. And so, yeah, knowing that is important. Something also to be aware of with cassettes is that with the longer lengths, so like 120-minute recordings, they're at a higher risk for issues such as tape breaks and an issue called print through, like I explained before, where the audio signal actually is partially transferred onto the adjacent wrap tape, and it causes really strange sounds that you don't want on a recording. So whenever we get cassette tapes in the collection that are 120-minute cassettes, we put them as being higher risk and get them on the path to digitization faster. And in short, just thinner tape equals higher risk of tape breaking and print through. This slide shows a simple anatomy of an audio cassette tape. Most playback issues can be solved by placing the audio tape in a new shell. You can still buy new cassette tapes for now. I say that because who knows, in a couple years, you can even specifically buy cassette shells without the tape in them for the very purpose of replacing the shells. So when I receive cassettes in our collection, like I said, the first thing I do is remove those write protect tabs. Next, I look at the pressure pad, which in the picture, it's at the very bottom there. And I look to see what condition it's in. A missing pressure pad is the most common cause for a tape to be eaten in a machine. The next issue can be a slip sheet. Those can cause binding issues and make the tape not place smoothly. If it's really bad, it can even stretch the tape like we saw on the other slide there. Sometimes you'll receive cassettes that use foam pressure pads, and they're horrible. Even if they kind of look like they might be in good condition, I would not trust them. I've been burnt too many times. So if they have that just nasty foam stuff, I'd put it in a new shell. So instead of me kind of explaining, well, oh no, that's the next slide. So there are also two types of cassette tape shells. They're held together with either 5 Phillips head screws and sonic welded cassettes, which they have no screws. They're actually held together. When they manufacture them, they melt the plastic together, so there's no screws. Whenever we replace shells that have like handwriting or other information, we make sure to note that information and create a new label with that same information. At times, we will even keep the old shells. For example, we had a collection where the cassette shells all had to be replaced. The content is they were recordings of an artist, and the artist had actually, I'm not sure why, but signed the cassette tapes. And so we felt that it was important to keep those signatures. And so we ended up keeping both replaced the tape, but then also kept the old shells. This was the slide I was meaning to explain. So this is a short sped up video of me actually putting a tape in a new shell. I wish I could work this fast. That'd be awesome. But yeah, I'm just taking out the screws, and then you'll see me pull the tape, pull the slip sheet off, put the tape in a new shell, and then I'll put the slip sheet on the top and then put the tape back together. And I know this is kind of a simple thing, but sometimes I like to see something in action, like, okay, you're telling me I need to replace the tape, but how do you actually do it? And so here's that. With sonic welded tapes, they're a little harder to get into. If you have sonic welded tape that needs to be reshelled, if you can first either forward or rewind the tape to one side and then crack the shell open on the side without tape, that can prevent damage to the tape. And we have hand winders. What I found though is in machines, usually if you hit play, then it'll eat the tape. But if you forward or rewind, usually you're okay. But if you want to be super safe, then I would just use a hand winder, which you can get they're available online. Here's a video of me cracking a shell open. So I'm saying, make sure to crack the side without tape. You do have to be careful because it can be sharp, and also sometimes the tapes want to go flying. So, and then from that point, I just put it in a new shell and it'd be good to go. So before digitization, we check a few things. We check the box, case, and labels for any useful information that might help us during the transfer. We visually inspect each item for damage or anything that could cause issues during playback, and we'll fix, repair, clean if needed. We clean the tape path and the playback heads on the playback machines using 99% isopropyl alcohol. We actually purchase quite a bit of that because we go through so much of it. Whenever we get new batches, I'll actually do a test where I put it on a drop on a mirror and just see if it completely evaporates and doesn't leave any kind of a residue. I have had a few times where it has, and so that's not usually a good sign. We also adjust the azimuth and set record levels, and I'm going to discuss azimuth in just a little bit here. So I was reading a book, and it was on the Navy SEALs, and it discussed a mantra that they live by, and I actually really liked it, and I felt it was applicable when handling and working with fragile items. And the mantra is this: slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And it's an easy way for me to remember, when I get in a rush, that's when I found that mistakes can occur and damage can occur. So it's just an easy reminder to approach situations with deliberate consideration and to be methodical and slow in order to complete tasks quickly. And so I really like it because, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, pretty easy to remember. Just to reiterate, one of the most important things when digitizing tape-based formats is to keep the playback heads and the tape path clean. Tape-based formats tend to shed oxide even when they're in good condition, and those particles can coat the playback heads and cause signal loss. We clean our heads and really the whole machine before each transfer, and this ensures we get the cleanest transfer. On a side note, with some videotape formats such as Digibeta, HD Cam, you use a cleaning tape. So instead of actually manually doing that, you can use a cleaning tape. They look just like a regular playback tape, but they're specifically made with a formula that cleans the head. Anyways, the reason I'm bringing this up is they're like impossible to find now. At least I've not been able to find them. So if anybody that's watching this knows where to find them or has like a stash somewhere, then please let me know. And that's something to be aware of in audiovisual preservation, is just a lot of these things are becoming obsolete and harder to find. You can clean those machines manually. It's just a lot more difficult, and it's easy to damage the heads as they're very fragile. So for audio digitization hardware and software, we capture our audio at a sample rate of 96 kilohertz and 24 bits. That's pretty common throughout the archiving world. For our playback machines, for our cassettes, we use Tascam's 122 MK3s. They're great, reliable machines. We do have some other machines. We have like some Nagamichi, what do they call? Yeah, Nakama dragons. I'll just call them that. I can't remember. We don't use them very often. Nakamichi, that's what they are. And then for audio reels, we use ATR 102s. They're great machines. We purchased those through the ATR services company. And the great thing about those is you can set them so they have the lower speeds, like 1 7/8, that play slower. So for capture software, we use Pro Tools 12. There are a lot of great capture softwares. I'm not saying that Pro Tools is the greatest, but we're all familiar with it, and so we use that. For analog to digital converter, we use a Focusrite Claret 8. Also, every time we capture, we have a capture sheet that we fill out, and we write down any anomalies or anything that we find during the transfer. And this is so when the files are audited, the person who's auditing will know that we understood what was going on, and like if there were clicks and pops and things, that we noted those. So we audit each other's work on all files created. We use Wavelab to check the audio and the waveform. And then we also use a free program called Media Info to check our files for consistency and to ensure the files meet our standards. And it's a great application to use. And so, like I said, we check things like format, sample rate, bit depth, ensure the file has no clipping. That's where if you're recording it way too loud on the digital side. And the embedded metadata, file names, and folder structure. For tape storage and handling, so our tape collection is stored at 55 degrees Fahrenheit with 35% relative humidity. You can kind of see that back picture. That's one of our areas that we store tape and other things. We make sure to wash hands and wear gloves when handling tape. I like nitrile gloves better than cotton, but I found that cotton can snag on things, but to each their own. Also, keeping tape away from strong magnetic fields. I actually wanted to show this. So this is just my cell phone, but like if you take a paper clip and just snap it on there, it'll fit right on there. Also, your computer is really magnetic. And so, yeah, you just want to be cognizant not to set your phone on stuff or like put stuff by there, because it can affect the signal. If you go on YouTube and search up magnets with tape or something like that, you'll probably see a bunch of videos where people will show how it can affect the sound really bad, or the video. So what is head azimuth and why does it matter? Every tape recorder uses both a record head and a playback head. Both heads have a screw that adjusts the head's azimuth, or the angle of the head. The standard for head azimuth is 90 degrees, but companies didn't always align their record and playback heads correctly from one machine to another. And then you get from one brand to another, and it could also be off. And so there's a good chance that the azimuth could be misaligned from the 90 degrees. The picture you see on the slide, the angle of the head azimuth is very much exaggerated. However, the azimuth doesn't need to be off by very much to make a recording sound dull. So why am I telling you this? I've had people ask about how they can know if a local vendor that they're taking their own, family or personal AV items to, if that vendor maybe knows what they're doing. And what I've told them is just to ask them, what's your process for adjusting the head azimuth for a tape-based item? So if they give you like a blank stare or they disappear in the back to frantically Google head azimuth, then I probably go somewhere else. So just instead of trying to explain what head azimuth is, I thought I'd share an example of myself adjusting the azimuth on a cassette tape so that you can hear the difference it can make. And so the screw is located just right under the head on these machines, which is the Tascam 122 MK3. And I'm using a flashlight so I can see the screw there.
I'm Jerry Pond in Salt Lake City with news from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The General Women's Meeting of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was held on Saturday, September 26th. The meeting originated from the Tabernacle on Temple Square. The meeting was opened with an address from Aline H. Clyde of the General Relief Society Presidency. She talked about the need for making good decisions on your own.
So as you can hear, hopefully it can make a big difference. Sometimes it's not that much of a change in the sound, but a lot of times you'll hear a pretty big difference. And yeah, it's very much worth, the azimuth should be adjusted on every tape. Conservation is actions taken to make an item playable so the content can be digitized. This includes things like mold remediation, cleaning, pest control, and repairing items. This photo is of a box of items that I worked on. It was a total of 5 boxes, and each one looked like this or worse when I opened them. And so, yeah, this is a really bad example of AV storage. Don't store your AV like that. Something else, this slide shows the importance again of having clean hands or wearing gloves when needed. You can see the actual moldy fingerprints of the person who handled this item. I have no idea what they were doing. Like, I imagine in my mind they were like eating a cheeseburger and then like touching the tape. I have no idea, but I actually pulled the prints and I found the person who handled the tape. I'm just kidding, I didn't. But anyways, it's an interesting thing that shows, how mold can grow on fingerprints. So make sure your hands are clean or you wear gloves. Pests are another issue to watch for. This is a cassette that I worked on that had a spider just in the spindle there. And then inside the tape, there was a whole nest. And so, yeah, kind of gross. It's interesting though, what I've found from my experience is the pests I've dealt with, they seem to use things like cassette shells, like Trojan horses. In my case, the pests don't seem to really damage the AV items. They may make it like dirty and gross, but you can clean them and they're fine. But they tend to hide there to get into the collection and then wreak havoc on things like books and paper items. Like you can see in this image here, this was a collection that came in that was already damaged, that had silverfish damage. And so, yeah, you always want to watch out for those little creepy things. With new collections arriving, I always look for signs of pests because they can wreak havoc. So earlier I discussed some of the differences between acetate and polyester tapes. The issue I'm about to discuss, it only affects polyester-based tapes. It goes by many different names, but I'm going to use the term sticky shed syndrome, as it seems to be like the most common way to describe it. So sticky shed syndrome is an issue that causes some polyester-based tapes to become sticky, and it makes the tapes unplayable. Well, you can play them, but they will sound horrible. They can damage your tape, and they can make a mess due to the oxide shedding off. There are many ideas and theories on why this issue occurs, but I was trying to explain it and I started getting into some rabbit holes that I didn't want to keep going down because this would turn into a 2-hour presentation. So the good news is there is a short-term fix that allows these tapes to be played and digitized. The fix is dehydrating the tapes at around a temperature of 57 Celsius or right around 134.6 Fahrenheit for right around 24 to 48 hours. These are the temperatures and the times that we use that we found after a long long time of testing and things like that that work well for our collection. This photo shows the scientific ovens that we use in our process for dehydrating sticky tapes. You can see there's a vacuum oven, and that one's cool because it pulls all the atmospheric pressure out, and it does some pretty interesting things. Something else to think about, if your tapes are coming from a humid area, they can be a lot worse because there's more moisture in the atmosphere that for some reason they're hygroscopic, so they just want to pull in moisture and have some other issues as well. But so putting them in these scientific ovens and dehydrating them will make them playable for around a month, at which time the tape slowly becomes sticky again. So this issue can affect both audio and video that is polyester-based tape. It also can affect them in different ways, as I'll show you here in a couple examples coming up. So can you use a food dehydrator? I've been asked this question by those that might not have a lot of tapes and don't want to spend a lot of money on an expensive scientific oven. If you are dehydrating a lot of tapes, then larger, much more expensive ovens are the way to go. They also have really cool bells and whistles, like they'll track the whole time and you can control them from a computer and stuff like that. So if you have a lot of stuff you're baking, that's the way to go. But a regular food dehydrator can work for smaller batches. I used a Nesco food dehydrator for a few years and found them to be as stable as high-end scientific ovens, which I was actually really surprised. If you go this route, you do need to use an accurate thermometer and also as well as a timer. One thing I will say is never use regular ovens or things like that, like convection ovens, unless you want to destroy the tapes. Then they'll probably work great for that and you'll end up with a mess. But yeah. So identifying if a tape is sticky can also be a challenge. For cassettes, audio reels, and videotapes, we have brands that we know from past experience have been sticky. And so with those, we kind of have a pretty good idea. With audio reels, you can unwind the tape and see if the tape sticks to itself. And if it doesn't fall freely, there's a good chance that it is sticky and needs to be dehydrated. So in this video here, you can see I'm winding it and it's wanting to stick on itself and it's kind of peeling off slowly. So that's not like a really sticky tape. We've had some where they're just completely sticky. And so you do want to be careful with this. That is the oxide. And so you have to be careful when you're winding and checking for these kinds of things. With our U-matic videotape collection, we've had to dehydrate all of them before playback. Here's a before and after example of a sticky cassette, and after it was dehydrated. You will first hear the cassette played as is, then you will hear the same audio after it's been dehydrated for 24 hours.
In Salt Lake, the Art Center is presenting Luminism and Drawing by Peter Moran. The exhibit hours are Tuesday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday and Sunday noon.
In Salt Lake, the Art Center is presenting Luminism and Drawing by Peter Moran. The exhibit hours are Tuesday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday and Sunday noon.
So yeah, quite a bit of a big difference. It's almost like magic when you've put a tape in and it just sounds so bad, and then you dehydrate it, and once the tape is completely cooled down, room temperature, and you put that in and play it, can be pretty amazing. So here is a before and after example of a U-matic video cassette that was sticky. And so we dehydrated it for right around 48 hours, and then it played fine. I'm actually kind of sad. I had a version that had the actual sound, but for some reason it was having some issues with Zoom. But so yeah, you can actually see the head, it's starting to glitch. And then at one point, it just completely coats the playback head and the signal is lost. Having the right equipment is key to creating accurate representations of AV items. Also, understanding that all playback machines will need to be maintained. And that's something to understand when getting into AV preservation. Something that's kind of maybe interesting in this photo. So you might notice that our video studio that's on the far end, we don't have machines in racks. We used to have them in racks and it looked really cool. but it was a nightmare to get to the heads to clean them, and you had to pull the things out, and it just, we found that it actually caused a lot of issues. And I'm not saying that everyone should get rid of racks and things like that, but we found it just having them laid out on tables, it just made things so much easier to deal with the machines. So it doesn't look as cool, but the functionality of being able to easily get to the video heads to clean, it's worth maybe not having it look so cool. But then we have an audio studio. We actually have 2 audio studios that are kind of mirrored and can play a lot of the same things. And then we have a motion picture film studio that's for all of our film content. In conclusion, I wanted to share a few helpful resources. This is not by any means a complete list, as there are so many helpful resources that deal with AV preservation. But the info is this is a good place to start. And I just wanted to say with the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, they have a section that's special and technical publications, and that's really a great place to start. If you want to delve deeper into audiovisual preservation and things like that. Also, I didn't include Library of Congress, but they also have great information. I also wanted to plug again Obsolete AV Museum. Richard Hess audio tape restoration tips and notes is fantastic. And then George Blood, we've partnered with George on many things. He's great to work with, and just just so knowledgeable on AV preservation, restoration, conservation, everything. So great resources to look at. Last but not least, I wanted to include SAA. SAA has a lot of great information and resources on preservation. If you just go to their search and put in audiovisual, you'll see it comes up with like 2,300 results and just a lot of fantastic information. One of the things I really liked and wanted to highlight is the SAA-ARCS terminology page. And that's where you can find every AV jargon word that's ever been created. And so I like that and appreciated that. And that's all I have. Thanks for having me. Hopefully some of this has been helpful or at least interesting. And yeah, if there's any comments or questions, hopefully I left enough time for that.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And yes, we actually have a few questions. We have about 13 minutes left, so let's see if we can't get through some of these. First question is, for acetate-based tapes, would you generally recommend outsourcing?
I think so. It depends. It depends on their condition. If they are at higher risk as far as like you know they're off gassing, they're having brittle issues, and like if you let some of the tape fall and it looks like it's cupping or deformed, if you don't have a way right then to deal with that, play back those tapes, then I would say probably outsourcing would be the best option. However, if in-house, if you have a higher end machine and a gentle machine that can handle those, then I would, if you're comfortable doing it in-house, you could do that. So I mean, sorry, I'm being kind of a fence sitter, but it's really hard to make that decision. If you have the equipment and you have the know-how, then I would say go ahead and do it. But yeah, outsourcing is always nice because you're kind of, I'll just be honest. One time we had a bunch of tapes that came in and they had mold all over them. And it was so nice to just be able to go, oh, here, you take that. I don't want to deal with it. I mean, they were covered in mold. It was pretty bad. I should have put some photos in, but so yeah, if you're comfortable doing it in-house, then I would do it. But if you're not, then I'd say outsourcing is a great option.
Next question, can you recommend any replacement tape shells?
Let's see, like Maxell, we use those. Pretty much you just want to go with the known brands. You can get some pretty bad ones. But if you look up like cassette tape shell replacements, a lot of times sites will come up where they'll actually have the shells just for replacing the shells. I don't have any of the sites offhand, mostly because we use different ones a lot of times each time. We used to use one that was I think it was called like Tape Center or something, and they had some really good ones. But yeah, I mean, as long as they're like a high quality, obviously you don't want to buy sonic welded shells because they wouldn't help you. You'd have to break them open. So you just want to make sure they have the 5 screws. But yeah, if you go with known brands, I mean, if you found Sony or Maxell, some of the other ones that are known, that's what I would stick to.
Next question. We have a few reels that were donated with several loops of the tape unspooled and wrinkled. How can we safely secure these?
So with like wrinkled tapes, it's kind of interesting. There's some different ways that I've dealt with them. One of the ways is I'll wind them actually backwards onto a new reel and let them sit for a while. And a lot of times that'll straighten out the tape enough that you can get a good transfer. You have to be careful with it. I mean, obviously, if they're really deformed and having issues, that can be a problem. Also, with like acetate tape, they get a thing called spoking, where it looks like spokes on a tire, and that's like when your tape is at the end of its life, and you've got to get it dealt with. And quite honestly, I would say in those cases, like if you can do like what I said, like wind it backwards, leave it for a while, and then wind it back to how it should be, and then try playing it. Whatever sound you can get off there, I'd be happy with, because when they get to certain points, they're almost beyond where you can do a whole lot with them. So it really depends on the condition, but in most cases, if they're slightly deformed, but they're still in pretty good shape, you can wind them backwards. And if that makes sense, does that make sense? Like, so your oxide is actually facing out on the reel, and you can leave it like that for a while, and sometimes it'll help to fix that for a time.
Next question. Can you recommend safe ways to send tapes for outsourcing? I don't want collection materials getting lost in transit.
Ooh. Man, I don't know. I mean, every time I would outsource stuff, we'd use these big Pelican cases and, lock them up. We put bands on them to make sure nobody's getting into them. We did once have questions of like, if they run it through certain things at airports, could it cause issues? We found that that's not the case unless if they're dealing with really old conveyor belts and things. There are some that have been shown to have issues. We've never had that trouble, but we've never really shipped to places where some of those older conveyor belts are still being used. But there's been some people that have been worried about, the magnetic parts used on the motor that it could erase. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'd say just use good materials to pack the tapes in, and if you can use something where it's a hard body, like a Pelican case, that would probably work best. I've shipped quite a bit of stuff out like that, and it's hard because I remember filling out the forms, and it's like, how much value do you want to put these at? And it's like, well, they're priceless. Like, there's not another one of these recordings, so I don't know what to even put that at. So it can be a real challenge. Yeah, sorry I don't have like a clear, like, do this and it'll get there safe, but I just say, insure it and maybe use, probably the sooner it can get there, the better. So it's a lot more expensive, but getting it there, in a day versus like just send it slow. Those are some of my recommendations.
Next question. Is it too late to digitize once I smell ammonia?
Okay, so you're probably smelling vinegar smell. And that happens with some acetate. That's pretty interesting though. Usually the vinegar syndrome smell, it comes with film that's mag track, so audio that's recorded on magnetic film. And no, it's not, unless it's getting to a powdery form. So if it's starting to get to where it's like just decaying and you pick it up and it just will snap in your hands like that, then you might have some issues. There may be some vendors that can still handle that kind of stuff, but I mean, we've had tons of film that has vinegar syndrome, and it's not been too late. In fact, a lot of times it sounds great once you get it digitized. But yeah, something to understand too with vinegar syndrome is if you have acetate tapes and you have that have vinegar syndrome and you have ones that don't, if you put them close to each other, it's actually like communicable. So it can start affecting tapes that don't have the issue. So that's something to think about. If you have tapes like that, it'd be good if you can store them away from each other. If you have tapes that, or if you have the reels that don't smell at that point. If they're audio reels that are smelling vinegary, I don't think they'd still be too far gone. I mean, it really depends. You'd have to have somebody who knows what they're looking at. And, but yeah, if the tape gets really brittle, that's probably the biggest issue because they'll just keep snapping from the torque of the machine. But I'd say go for it. Like, I don't think they're too far gone. This is the thing too, is like, yeah, it's just going to keep getting worse. So you either have to deal with it yourself and try and get that content off, or outsource it to somebody.
Next question. Does your organization have any audiovisual materials that were originally broadcast on radio? Does this affect format or digitization needs?
That's a good question. We do have a lot of content that's been broadcast on radio, like Music in the Spoken Word, which is like, I think it's one of the oldest programs that's been on forever. We capture them at the same standards that we do everything. And so if we had a broadcast that's, you know, say it came from a radio, we'd capture it at 96 kilohertz, 24 bits, PCM wave. And yeah, so I can't think of anything that we'd do different. A lot of times the good thing with broadcasts is they tend to be a lot more consistent. And so anytime I've dealt with migrating the music and the spoken word and some of the content like that, it's really nice because, you know, you know that it's going to be fairly consistent, where you don't get that with other types of things. So I'd actually say broadcast content tends to be easier to work with or deal with.
Next question. You mentioned humidity/moisture as an issue. Would a lack of moisture or humidity be a preservation concern as well? My institution is located in a desert.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, ours is too. I would say though that humidity, being in a place that's humid could in a lot of ways be worse, because you'll get a lot more chances for mold to grow and things like that. But yeah, I mean, you want to make sure. What I would say is, with tape-based formats, and really with a lot of things, the worst thing you can do is have it where it goes from one extreme to the other. So if it's going from like very dry to really humid, or you're going from super hot to really cold, that's when it's the worst for the formats, and it'll start to, you know, cause the things inside the tape to contract, and then they'll expand and contract, and it can cause, you know, oxide shedding and stuff like that. But I mean, I do know that like 35% relative humidity, that's like a really good thing to go for. But yeah, I think just consistency is the most important, and also not having those extremes. So like when people put their stuff in attics and stuff, that's like, or basements, you know, where if you live in a place where there's snow and then there's hot, like I do, it can be really detrimental to collections, because it's just, yeah, having those constant swings can really cause a lot of problems.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. That was the last question that we'll be able to knock out in this time frame. Thank you again for your presentation, and thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you.